Alrighty. And in the second part of our discussion, together with Konrad Schuller, when our beloved friend Jason had departed, we went into significantly more German topics, respectively, try to galvanize what we had touched upon beforehand and go into a little bit of detail, which for some of you might be of interest. We hope that you will enjoy it. Here we go.
Let's come back maybe to sum up what after the election in Germany, what I think a German government should focus on.
I have a question in that regard. I would like to quiz you, and for the audience, I think it's important to know. Do you think that the outgoing government, now that they see, and the SPD is likely to go into a coalition with the CDU, yes, they will probably try to make it arduous and excruciating and have a membership vote and all that kind of jazz. They'll play all the bad games, I'm quite sure. But still, as they go into a coalition where they will have to invest in defense more, do you think that the current government will have the capacity to, together with the votes of the Christian Democrats in parliament, change what the Germans call Sondervermögen, the exceptional say assumption of debt, because nothing else it is.
Law, yeah.
Do you think they will do that? Because they still have a majority.
There is a chance. There is a chance, and just to explain it maybe to our audience, Germany has a constitutional rule which prohibits the state to make more a deficit larger than 0.35% of the GDP per annum.
Yes,
which is very strict, which is a strict form of austerity, and which is which makes it difficult to spend those sums on defense which are necessary. And the conservatives, the Christian Democrats, and the liberals have until now strictly said this spending rule is the root of our and the basis of our of the success of the German economy. We are not suffering a huge burden of national debt. We are going to defend that, and that has changed these days.
Yeah,
exactly. Actually, yesterday and today, from the Chancellor-elect Merz, we hear signals he is personally ready to gradual changes if they are specifically targeted to defense, to basically to allow excess spending targeted to defense. The sums are quite substantial that I hear of. It's something like 200 billion euros that might be allowed as but you need to change the constitution for that, because spending is a German dogma. It's a German taboo. So the constitution. So
you have to be fair and tell people why that is, because Germany was quite spendthrift in the 1970s. It regurgitated this, and it created a new wave of massive spending as a consequence of unification. And then again had another spending run under Schröder initially, which then had to stop because of the higher cost of debt.
And I think even deeper historical roots, because hyperinflation in the 20s was the wave that the Nazis served to power.
Absolutely.
So the hyperinflation is one of the national traumas in Germany, and very deeply seated. And yes, we might see a change these days, which by a strange, basically, let's say, from the point of view of of the pure doctrine of democracy, it would be strange that we have a newly elected parliament which is not sitting yet, the old parliament is still sitting, the new parliament would not have the majority to change these dogmatic constitutional rules. So the discussion is, let's have the old parliament sit one last time to change the constitution, although the new one is already elected, but it's going to sit first at the end of March.
Yeah, but it's Parliament. Parliament is in service, is in session. It is allowed to do so. So
yes, I would say those who say, how can you? Because the majority of the population has voted and has created a different majority. How can I say, for the greater good of our defense, I would accept this slight.
That if somebody makes the argument that the majority of the population has voted, then we should be also fair to say that if you take all the parties together who are in favor and who have been voted for by 100% of the population, because the threshold, 5% threshold, is for parliamentary, what we would call administration, Geschäftsordnung, organization. But if you want to represent the popular will, then more than 2/3 have voted for democratic parties.
Okay, so I take this as a healthy argument.
Yeah, but other than that, I agree with you.
Thanks for that one. Thanks for that one. Yes, and we might have this situation where the outgoing majority, together with the upcoming majority, might change our constitutional rules and make another credit line of 200. Maybe it's the sum has not been negotiated yet, and also the details. It's not sure yet. But
do you think that the SPD and the Greens will both extract compensation for this? So the Greens will probably say only if you also give 50 million for whatever kind of climate, blah blah blah. And the SPD will say we want 100 billion for infrastructure. So it's not going to be 200 for defense only. Is that the horse trading which is ongoing?
They might try, but they don't. Their leverage is small because everybody knows they want it anyways. They cannot say no. It's an offer. It's an offer they cannot refuse, because they have advocated this change for years and years. And now then you offer it to them. They can't. Well, they could say, I always said yes, but now I say no, and I add some conditions to it. Okay, would that be believable? Not very. So they might try it, and I don't think they will get very much out of it.
Okay, so in short, when we go to wrap this up, there is a possibility that for the first time in Germany, actually in this transition, we will see parliamentary action which has constitutional impact and may actually, from your and I presume also from our joint perspective, will probably save Germany. Because it's vital. Germany must invest in defense. And if it invests in defense, funny enough, it can convert a lot of capacity which otherwise currently is economically insolvent. A lot of the manufacturing, a lot of the industrial supply chains are currently stressed out due to the regulation enforced upon Germany, due to the energy restrictions enforced by the previous government. Today, we heard, fortunately, and I've highlighted this, that Mr. Merz took the first necessary step to stop the phasing out of nuclear power plants. That's great. It's highly likely that the Social Democrats will actually be in favor of that, because otherwise their clientele will evidently have issues in future, because if you employ fewer people, then fewer people will vote, say, as Social Democrats in the manufacturing sector. They just lost the vote. I think the AfD is not only in the new 5 states, as well as, but in many other states. Now, the party which has the highest vote of people who are considered to be workers, which is a very small percentage of the total employed population, roughly 10%, and they have the highest participation rates in terms of votes, which is bad. That previously was always, say, what they call a métier of the Social Democrats, that it churned over to the Christian Democrats in the late 2010s, but that's it. This is a necessary step for the Social Democrats. They need to change their energy policy, because they now know that it doesn't serve to be, how shall I put this? You can't be on renewable energy and dead, but you can be on carbon neutral, nuclear, cheap, alive and working. This is what Merz also said, and they seem to have made an agreement already earlier today. And this is before Pistorius has been voted into anything. How do you see the role of Boris Pistorius?
It's not easy to answer. He seems to understand the challenges that could come from outside, the challenge of Russia. He seems to understand that Germany has to rearm. But he was not a very great fighter in the last couple of years. When it came to put his way on the table, he shied back from the shootout. He could have.
Well, he is from Osnabrück. He is from Osnabrück. He knew Scholz since he was 12 and Scholz was 10.
Because he repeatedly complained about getting too little money for the armed forces as a Minister of Defense, but he complained and he didn't follow up. And he had a chance in fall when the ratings of Scholz were falling into an abyss to challenge him.
Yeah.
And it didn't use. It didn't. With Scholz had the worst ever election result since the time of Emperor William.
Yes.
They have never been weaker since the time of Emperor William. So maybe Pistorius should have used that opportunity.
But character-wise, he is not the one who wants to do that. He doesn't fight for leadership.
So that was my impression. Yes, that when it becomes lethal, he doesn't have that killer instinct that you sometimes need.
So who do you think has? Who do you think in the SPD currently has? Mr. Klingbeil doesn't necessarily occupy all, as they call, all political sectors, arenas, and the likes. It's not that he is an overarching leader who has a grasp of everything. He's a reasonably young person. He has done parliamentary work. He's not an expert in anything, but he's also not the generous leader on the other hand. Is there someone who's going to come up and surprise us?
I don't see that person in the. I don't see that person in all over the German arena at the moment, and also Germany is not working that way. Germany has always been a consensus-oriented machinery. The German democracy has always been a consensus-oriented machinery, and in that sense, maybe I have to revisit my criticism of Pistorius, that he's not a killer. In the German machinery, you don't need to be a killer. Still, he could have had a little bit more guts when it came to maybe saving his party from the worst defeat since the times of Emperor William, and helping his country to confront the danger that comes. I think the only political leader in Germany who has this what I just labeled as a killer instinct, that is Markus Söder.
Yeah.
If you hear him talk, he's a political beast, an animal. I don't mean that in the derogatory way.
No. I get that. I think the audience gets it as well. They understand this.
That is also true for the leader of the AfD, for Weidel. I think she also has this sort of I speak metaphorically. She could cold-heartedly kill. Mm-hmm. Metaphorically speaking, I don't want to be liable to have a libel case. But I think that these two.
She is a one-trick pony, is she not? I mean, she has one thing and one thing only. She constantly complains about the fact that there's so much money being lost on migrants. And then she talks about, as soon as she just starts talking about taxes and industry, she's lost. Completely, utterly lost.
I don't speak about her competence but
the political instincts.
The approach, the way she can scornfully address somebody. So if looks could kill, they probably will. In her case, so but this is not the way German politicians usually work. German politics has actually always worked in the Merkel and Kohl way. Merkel and Kohl, who were chancellors for 16 years, each of them, were the consensus builders and not the killers. And let's see, I think at the moment, as we are walking towards a coalition of the traditional opponents in Germany, the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, who actually need consensus builders, who understand that new times have come and we need to defend not just ourselves, but that the whole part of the world that we are living in needs to be defended.
That's an interesting. You draw from this from the fact that the centrist parties now have one chance. You draw from this that there needs to be consensus. If you just listen to the counter argument for a second, on the one hand, you highlight the killer instinct, the political killer instinct, the political instincts of Mr. Söder. I'm not highlighting any of his other views; it's completely irrelevant. And these instincts are based on accepting conflict. Mr. Merz himself said that he found it rejuvenating and important that the last election campaign actually put up a proper contrast between what is being voted for. Whatever the outcome, but it was important that there was a proper, sensible dispute, not just discussion, dispute in the public sphere about what is right, what is necessary, what should be done, who stands for what. May I posit that rather than in the Kohl years, which were years where the political consensus had actually been dissolved by the Social Democrats by employing underhand tactics to get rid of Rainer Barzel together with the Stasi, that's probably that Mr. Kohl managed to reunite, despite the fact that he was constantly being portrayed as someone who has been dissolving the consensus. Helmut Schmidt said so, that this was an underhand tactic to get rid of him, the constructive vote of no confidence after having taken Mr. Lambsdorff into confidence. He said so, but it was actually the opposite, because it was the Social Democrats who worked with the Stasi to get rid of Rainer Barzel. Now, having said this, maybe, and we've seen how bad the consensus of Ms. Merkel has worked for Germany, because everything fell into deep sleep. No sensible discussion. Every discussion had to be modified as soon as a poll came up, which drew her towards a majority somehow here, then she went there. And if there was a poll there, she literally, and she said so, that she was drawn in by polls. She was the first person in German politics, other than Mr. Schröder, who constantly took in these polls in order to gauge the popularity on a weekly level. Would it not be better to have someone like Konrad Adenauer or someone like then the young Mr. Strauss, who actually also said no, who disagreed? Because if you remember the Strauss debates in 1976 and in 1980, he lost the election, but still, if you remember those debates on German television, they were concise, they were precise, they were hard in der Sache, as we say, hard on topics, but at least they made it clear.
On the other hand, you're right in many points. If I look at other countries who don't have this culture of conflict, this culture of consensus, like our great ally, the United States, would we rather be like those? We have Americans who think that it's not unimaginable that United States might experience another civil war. It's not the most stupid ones who have this fear.
Yeah.
We don't have this fear in Germany yet.
True.
So
No, I agree, but that's fine. But that is contrasting, if I may say, apples and oranges, because they also have a different electoral system. Our British friends have a different, more polarized electoral system. The Liberals have had a difficulty to regain, sufficient actual clout. They only made it into one coalition government ever since Lloyd George, who gave them majorities. So this is ages ago. And the one which they had with Monsieur Milquetoast was also not very, Mr. Cameron, Lord Cameron by now, was also not very successful for the Liberals. In France, you have a presidential democracy. You don't have this topic as well. So there's always contrast and conflict. They solve it in this way. Maybe we just have a little bit too much of a consensus sometimes.
So we could agree on that, maybe. So
sorry, I was just challenging because it seemed to me that you, on the one hand, beforehand said that it's important to have these political instincts because leadership is required and leadership matters a great deal.
Yeah, and of course, you need the proper mix of both. I think at the moment I would still tend to say, as we have so deep conflicts in society. You're right. I criticize historians for not having the guts to fight at the moment where you should have been fighting. Maybe I would differentiate between having let's say, being at the point of the showdown and then taking a decision, which he didn't, as opposed to nourishing long-standing social disagreements, social splits. So the consensus seeker, in the sense that he is shying away in the moment of decision, is the person who loses the opportunity when it is there. Whereas the consensus seeker who tries to bring parts of society together, that's a different thing. And I think that is something that we desperately need, because all of Europe and all of what we used to call the West, what might have been the West, is falling apart because of lack of social. Look at France. Look at the United States. Look at growing dissensions in Germany and other countries, Poland, Hungary. You name them. Much of them we have talked about that has been fueled by Russia, but it would be naive to think that is just Russia who did it. That has very, very deep other roots.
Alliances, coalitions, social cohesion, strength of communities. Can the Europeans muster it?
That used to be a strength of Germany. That the lack of this consensus might be the point where this immensely creative America that we see might fail to harvest the fruits of its success if society breaks apart there and sinks into conflict. They are immensely creative, immensely energetic, but I fear, and I really fear, without being malicious, I really fear that this country might lose its opportunity by falling into a internal conflict of a depth that it hasn't seen since the Civil War.
I would strongly highlight that the United States of America has had a number of presidential discussions and phases which were absolutely terrifying to look at if you go into history. The years in the run-up to McKinley, massive growth, expansion, this, that, the other. Then the isolationism and the Harding administration, which Coolidge then had to fend off against and still remained tied up with the isolationists. Then the polarization of the 30s. I'd say let the Americans do their thing. I'm quite sure that they are strong enough to cover it. My question for you is really, this comes back to an article which you wrote, and I can only highlight to everyone listening or watching this, please go after this. We'll put this in the show notes. A few days before the election, you, having traveled through Germany for a few days in a row, you wrote an article in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung about 8 days and the likes, where you you collated your observations as to what the electorate, the people, normal people, saw and how they reacted to their politicians. If you take this and compare it to what you just said about the communities and the strength of the Germans, is the German polity, is its electorate, is the country still capable of making decisions and changing?
I very much hope so. But I think the way up hasn't yet completely happened. I see a still dormant society in Germany, and we still have to take them and shake them and try to awake them. On the other hand, the positive side is on this trip, 8 towns, 8 days. I was out on the streets with crowds protesting against and for the right wing, and I always had the impression that it was not a, let's say, physical aggression that I could see there. It was still a sort of, let's say, middle class form of middle class, quite well mannered way of going out on the street protesting against each other. So it was important for me. I'm usually a journalist sitting in the capital and not seeing very much of the country. It was important to me to see that all these conflicts that my colleagues always write about and that I also write about, because we, as journalists, we always pick out the stingy and the edgy parts. Yes. If you go out into the country, I had the impression it's actually much calmer than I would have expected. The bad side of this calmness is sleepiness. So we have to wake them up, wake them and shake them without making them, without losing this inherent readiness for consensus, which I still see in Germany. Much more if I look close to simple people than if I look to politicians. When I'm, for example, I'm not, probably nobody will suspect me to be close to the extreme right wing. But when I went to a place where Alice Weidel, the head of AfD, was speaking to her supporters, and I could, they recognized that I was not one of them, but they were actually happy that I was listening to them. And that I was listening to them when they told me, we are not Nazi monsters. I think some of them are, by the way, but many of them aren't.
No dispute, no argument from me. I tend to agree with you.
But many of them weren't, and I could see dialogue is possible. You don't need to hate each other, and those who are under the influence of this hate speech are sometimes happy to meet somebody who doesn't hate them. I disagree with them strongly, but I don't hate them. And I could see how something fell off them. Like finally, one of those
dialogue can be surprising, right? As a method.
Yeah, and they all told me in this xenophobic party. Basically, every single one told me how many friends of non-European origin they have, and that how nice people this African colleague at work is, but of course migration itself is so. But I think the readiness to be a society again is bigger in Germany than you would guess if you just read the newspapers or see the TV shows.
Did you see the wave of young people going for both the hard left, as we saw in the last 2-3 weeks of the election, sponsored by a lot of Russian-funded TikTok, yet again, as evidently the Germans will find out after the election only, and also for the right, the hard right of the AfD, that especially young people were motivated by those two streams?
But what I saw were these street rallies after Merz sided in one vote in the Bundestag with the AfD, what they call it anti-fascist rallies, and there too I didn't see a manifest aggressive atmosphere. Criticism was always tried to be humoristic in most cases. Very little hateful shouting. So this, and also I could not see traces of let's say organized language. So they didn't have
no repeated, no precast narratives. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So everybody had his own little shield where he wrote some rhymes in it. In German, Mats and Hats, which is Mats and Hart rhymes. So they did all sorts of rhymes with Mats is Hat, Schmerz, whatever. Which in English would be Merz is a heartbreak.
But that is predominantly the privilege of youth to do these kind of playful things. I think we once had the culture of Sponti in Germany in the 1970s that also fit into the same thing. And this is how the Green Party actually tried to convince a lot of people, young voters in the 1980s, in the same fashion, using humorous and insidious and sarcasm and the likes, which is the typical way of trying to engage with them. Why did the other parties, the more center parties, fail to be able to convince the young people that there is a future? Is this all back down to what we said at the beginning, or what you also highlight in your 3 points, economics? And therefore, if you have less of an economic gain and future, and less perspective, that therefore you're more gullible to fall prey to, shall we say, actionism or actionismus on the left and on the right? And did you observe that, or was it something which came up when you were there? Because I wasn't traveling the country for 8 days, but you were, so I'd rather, have your input.
Well, first of all, it was not just young people. It was also the peacenik and hippie generation, which is now 70 to 80.
Yeah.
So it was the peacenik and hippie generation which was on the street, and there's successive families. So it was a mix of many age groups, and also you could see that when the crowds were spoken to, I saw that, for example, in Nuremberg. Nuremberg has a Christian, I would say Christian Democratic, although it's called different in Bavaria, Christian Democratic mayor, who is actually representing the party that they protested against. But the mayor delivered greetings to the crowd, and he wasn't booed at. The crowd accepted.
Okay.
The greetings.
It is a very civilized. It's a very civilized, shall we say, election campaign by comparison. Despite the fact that I was so happy that there at least was clarity and conflict somewhere, but it was still very civilized.
Okay. I suggest let's make a full stop at this point.
Yes.
And it was good fun.
Absolutely, and I'm sorry to have prolonged this ordeal for you further, but I thought it was very helpful also for people to understand what you experienced, because I think it's vital that people get a better understanding as to how the debate in Germany, so the Germans say klein, it's so micro, but at the same time it has such a massive impact. So in that regard, thank you very much for taking the time.
All the best, and Slava Ukraini.
Slava Ukraini. We'll get there. We'll win it. Ciao, Konrad. Tschüss.
Ciao.